Good evening and welcome to this fall of 2020 preview for our town meeting, which is scheduled for Saturday, October 17 at 8 a.m. and it will be virtual once again, just as we had the summer town meeting. I'm Steve Triffletti, Plymouth Town Moderator. I'm joined in the PACTV studios this evening live with Nicole Manfredi, our Assistant Town Moderator. Julie Thompson, she is the Executive Director for PACTV, and her staff is supporting us along with 5 members of the PACTV staff who are at the help desk this evening. You'll be hearing more about that shortly from our Assistant Moderator. The purpose of the preview is to give you an overview of the motions that are coming to town meeting. And we invite town meeting members to listen and then review carefully when you receive a motions packet from the Advisory and Finance Committee. Now, in preparation for this evening, once again, you have your materials. We have the report and recommendations of the Advisory and Finance Committee. We also have a supplement 1 to the report and recommendations of the Advisory and Finance Committee, and we have the minutes by article from the Advisory and Finance Committee. And this evening we'll be joined by a panel, most notably by Kevin Canty, who is the chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee, who will speak to the motions presented. We're also joined by Ken Tavares. He is the chair of the Plymouth Select Board, and they will be supporting these articles on which they've held hearings on all of them. We have a number of other panelists available. We invite town meeting members to ask questions if you want information. We will not be debating or deliberating on articles, but rather this is for informational purposes as town meeting members continue to prepare for the town meeting that'll be next week. Also want to thank Christy Kenny and Drew from OTI Technology. They are here this evening to help with vVoter. We'll be going to that very soon. And again, this town meeting will be held virtually. It'll be by remote participation. And it is my intention as moderator to continue at least so long as there is a pandemic and there is a state of emergency. However, I did want to begin to have town meeting members thinking about the fact that the Massachusetts Moderators Association will be holding its annual meeting later this month. I'll be attending and participating in a panel for representative town meeting moderators. And one of the proposals that is coming before the Mass Moderators Association is a request to present legislation for an enabling act to continue with representative town meeting remote participation after the state of emergency ends and after the pandemic ends. So I wanted town meeting members to know about that. We'll keep you updated when the legislation is submitted and when there are hearings in case you are in favor or opposed to such legislation. But that is something that is in your future. And at this time, I'd like to go now to Nicole Manfredi, our Assistant Moderator. Welcome, Nicole. And what do you have for us this evening?
Good evening. I just wanted to let town meeting members know that I'm encouraging folks to reach out to me via email by this evening if you have any technology needs. I've sent out two emails this week with hopes of identifying anyone who has the need for technology, whether it be a computer or internet connection. I'm working closely with the school department. We don't have as much flexibility as we did over the summer, but we're hoping that we can fill anybody's needs if they're feeling like they need additional support with technology. So email me by the end of this evening and let me know what your needs are. And once again, we have folks here manning the help desk. So while this isn't a traditional town meeting format, we do have the help desk available if you have any technology questions, or while we're practicing this format, you have trouble getting into a platform or such. The number for the help desk is 774-773-6111. Thanks.
Thank you. And with that, we certainly want to thank the Plymouth Public Schools, and in particular Dr. Christopher Campbell, our Plymouth Public Schools Superintendent, who have been supporting us with the use of the school for town meeting members. Last town meeting, we had 130 town meeting members participate throughout the sessions of town meeting, and we're very pleased at the response of town meeting members in utilizing the technology for the remote participation. We also want to let people know that if you join us late or if you have to leave early, this town meeting preview will replay on the government access channels, Comcast channels 15, Verizon channels 47, beginning this Saturday, October 10th at 6 p.m. Also, Monday, October 12th at 8 p.m., and there'll be more replay showtimes to follow. In addition, tomorrow afternoon on Friday, October 9th, at PACTV video share channel at youtube.com, you can also see, and Saturday afternoon at PACTV video on demand at www.pactv.org/video on demand. These will be, again, replays of tonight's preview. All town meeting videos, such as the presentation night and the individual presentations and the preview, can be viewed on the PACTV video share channel at youtube.com. Now, between now and town meeting, we will continue to communicate with town meeting members and the public. Town meeting members, you can be looking for additional emails from me or Nicole, or from Jeanette White, who is the administrator for the Advisory and Finance Committee. We'll communicate also in the paper, on the radio, and next Wednesday at the weekly COVID-19 update, which is shown live at noon every Wednesday. I will also provide any additional updates that will be helpful for the upcoming town meeting. Now, at this time, we're going to invite town meeting members to go to your V-Voter. And we're going to be asking OTI Technologies and PACTV to set up a roll call for the attendance of town meeting members. Again, another opportunity for town meeting members to practice using V-Voter. And it gives all of us an opportunity to see who's joined us this evening, and also for any newly elected town meeting members, a little more practice. So we'll be looking on the screen to see when it comes up, and this will be to vote, and you'll see roll call. Please select one and press the green light. And we're going to be given 30 seconds to vote. The 30 seconds is showing you begin voting as soon as the clock starts to tick, and it's going now. So town meeting members are now voting. For those of you watching the live presentation on October 8, 2020, that began at 6 o'clock, you see town meeting members have the opportunity to vote as to whether or not they want to identify as being present at the town meeting preview. And throughout town meeting, they will have 30 seconds in which to register their votes, whether it be for attendance or whether it be for voting on an article. The voting has concluded, and now what we do is we go by precinct to determine the results. So we're seeing in precincts 1, 2, and 3, the blue shows those people who are present. We don't have a total yet, but I believe we're showing 53 people have already logged in as being present. Precincts 4, 5, and 6 are now being told 64. 64 have logged in so far, and we're going through the precincts. Precincts 7, 8, and 9. For those of you that are watching, you can see which of your town meeting members in your precinct have joined us this evening for the preview. Precincts 10, 11, and 12. We're going through all 15 precincts in the town of Plymouth, and this is an opportunity for people to log in precincts 13, 14, and 15. And we will continue this evening to take another couple of votes as town meeting members practice and train for next week's town meeting. So at this time, we would, in the meeting, go to the consent agenda. I'm not going to take a vote yet, but I do want to explain that we've had a few changes, and that is that initially we were going to vote 2 consent agenda motions. One was going to contain those motions that require a quantum of vote of a majority. We were going to have a second consent article for those that required 2/3. But at the motions meeting on Tuesday, we became aware that a couple of the articles, Article 12 is no motion, no action, and Article 11, no motion, no action, which greatly reduced the consent agenda. We decided to combine all of the remaining articles on both consent agendas into one motion, because the feeling would be the whole reason for putting them on is that there's not a lot of division or debate on these articles. We expect they're going to pass unanimously or near unanimously, and that's why they've been consolidated and bundled onto one article. So the new consent agenda is going to include Article 7, Foothills Preserve Plantings, Article 10, to amend the bylaw, Chapter 9 for the Advisory and Finance Committee, and Article 13 on the zoning, revise the Aquifer Protection District map. So a little bit later in the meeting, we'll be asking town meeting members to vote on the consent agenda. But you will all be receiving a motions packet. And this will be the second motion. The first motion, of course, will be whether or not to vote to have a virtual town meeting. We practiced last week. The vote after the consent will be the adjourned sessions, which we practiced last week. And so those will be procedural votes for town meeting. I invite any town meeting member or any resident through a town meeting member who wishes to make a motion to please contact me as soon as possible, because we want to be able to present your motions in writing to town meeting members in advance of the town meeting. So if there is something which you wish to accomplish procedurally, please contact me. You can call me at 508-746-1464. You can also email me at fst@plymouthlaw.com. And I invite you to contact me if you have something. I've received several motions this week from town meeting members. One we talked through, and I believe the town meeting member is satisfied with my ruling. The other I will present to you this evening when we come up to that article. But now, looking at the warrant, Article 1, I have no motion, and at town meeting, hearing no motion, I'll declare no action. Article 2A, Mr. Canty moves to amend the votes taken under Article 7A of the August 2020 Summer Annual Town Meeting in accordance with a spreadsheet that is going to be attached, and specifically to increase by $15,000 the amount appropriated for the fire department. This is going to be a majority vote, and of course there'll be a roll call vote, and we have in our panel Kevin Canty. He's the chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Steve. So, in a unanimous vote of 11-0 to 0, the Advisory and Finance Committee recommends town meeting approve Article 2A. Approval of this article will increase the fire department's communications services line item for the current year, fiscal year 21, by $15,000 to cover the $3,000 per month rental costs for the temporary trailer mounted communications tower. The old communications tower was considered a safety concern due to its very poor conditions, and as such was dismantled prior to this hurricane season. This temporary tower is necessary to provide adequate communications services coverage to both the fire and police departments throughout town until a new permanent tower can be erected.
That is Kevin Canty. He is the chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee. And at this preview, you can certainly ask questions to gather information. For this particular article, for example, our fire chief, Edward Bradley, would be available to answer questions. If you have questions, please go to vVoter. If you are a town meeting member, you have that available to you, and I will recognize you for your questions. We'll bring you in from being an attendee to being a panelist in order that you can be seen by video as well as have your audio heard. For those people in the town of Plymouth who are not town meeting members who do wish to speak at town meeting, you're reminded that you need to contact Pearl Sears, the town clerk, at least 48 hours in advance of town meeting in order that she can confirm that you are approved as a voter in the town of Plymouth and thereby eligible to speak at town meeting. Our town meeting does provide for opportunities for people who are not a taxpayer or a resident with the permission of town meeting, and people who are non-residents would need to go through me, although for this enabling legislation from the statute, there's a specific procedure as to how people can easily get in to becoming a speaker at town meeting. And again, that's Pearl Sears, the town clerk, you will contact before contacting me as the moderator. So I do see a question now. We're going to go to Precinct 10, Peter Neville. He wants to speak on Article 2A. Again, he's communicating to us through the V-Voter platform that's available. And when I recognize him, we're going to bring him in now as a panelist so we can see him and hear him. And he'll ask his question, and then we will. Peter, we're being told you need to turn your camera on. We can see you as a panelist, but you're muted and your camera's not. You're unmuted. You can talk. If you want to be seen, turn on your camera. There you are, Peter. We can see you. Good evening and welcome. Peter Neville.
Just a quick question.
Go ahead.
$15,000 divided by 3 is 5 months. I guess I'm wondering why it's not an annual lease, or is it an annual lease? Looks like we're gonna rent it for 5 months. Why not 12 months? Just simple question.
Okay, that's a question from Peter Neville. We're going to go to the Plymouth Fire Chief, Edward Bradley, to respond to a question from Peter Neville of Precinct 10. Chief Bradley, good evening.
Good evening. We had originally gotten a transfer of funds at the end of fiscal 20 that covered the cost of having the tower delivered and 1 month's rent and to have the equipment installed on the tower. We then got a transfer at the beginning of FY21 for 6 months worth of rental, $3,000 a month for 6 months. The hopes was that in the annual town meeting in August, we would get the authority to go ahead with the new tower and we wouldn't have to lease it for more than 6 months. Now that that was turned down, we'll be going back to town meeting again. We realize that we're going to need the rest of the year. So this 5 months on top of the 6 and the 1 month will make the full 12 months.
Thank you, and that's
So,
Plymouth Fire Chief
December
Edward
31st,
Bradley. Peter Neville, do you have any follow-up question?
So will the lease expire on December 31st?
Chief Bradley?
We can cancel the lease at any time before it's due. It's due the 8th of the month. So if for some reason things went along very smoothly and we were able to get another tower up, we could get rid of this less than that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And town meeting members, this is a good example. If you look at Mr. Neville and you look at Chief Bradley, there's a vast difference between the two of them in terms of the quality of the video as well as the audio. So town meeting members, we did respond to the request from the last town meeting that we show videos of town meeting members, but we are in part dependent on equipment of town meeting members, on Wi-Fi connection, and on bandwidth. And with Mr. Neville, we saw a readout that his bandwidth was low. And because his bandwidth was low, presumably that has an effect on the visibility for him. But again, thank you to PACTV for making the videos possible for this town meeting. Any further questions on Article 2A? If not, we're going to go to Article 2B, no motion, no action. Article 3, no motion, no action. And next we go to Article 4. Now, following the presentation night, I received many requests from town meeting members that we divide Article 4. And although I received a request to move it in the interest of saving time at town meeting, I've decided on my own as moderator to separate the votes for each of the items under Article 4. However, the Advisory and Finance Committee voted this as an entire article. So we'll hear first from Kevin Canty, the chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee, and then I will have each one treated separately for purposes of questions of town meeting members. Mr. Canty, good evening.
In a unanimous vote of 11 to 0 to 0, the Advisory and Finance Committee recommends town meeting approve the following appropriations as listed in the report and recommendations book that all town meeting members have received. Item 4A, Fire Department Communications Tower. Item 4B, Fire Department Vehicle Lift System. Item 4C, Herring Ponds Watershed Study for the Department of Marine and Environmental Affairs. Item 4D, Engineering and Design for Dam Bypass at Jenny Pond, also from the Department of Marine and Environmental Affairs. Item 4E, the Manomet Zone pipeline upgrades for the Water Department. Item 4F, the Airport Taxiway Echo Extension for the airport. And item 4G, the purchase of NW-26 SRE building, also for the airport.
Thank you.
All of that was voted by the Advisory and Finance Committee in one vote under Article 4.
Thank you, Kevin Canty, Chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee. OTI Technology, at the end of going through the items A through G, I am going to take a vote of town meeting members. It'll be, the vote will be whether to divide Article 4 into items A through G. So town meeting members, although I'm going to take it up tonight separately, I'm going to take also a vote to get a read from town meeting as to whether or not you want to treat it as the Advisory and Finance Committee did with one overall vote for Article 4, or whether you want to divide among items. And this is not binding, but it will be an opportunity to get a sense of town meeting. So we're going to begin now with item A, and that's the communications tower, and it's an appropriation of $500,000. At the motions meeting, the motion we received was the motion to move the entire amount, $5,951,024, to pay costs of various capital projects and for the payment of the costs incidental or related thereto. And that to meet this appropriation, and then I'm going to leave it blank because we're going to have separate sourcing for each of these items, and you'll be getting that before town meeting. But again, anyone wanting to speak on item A, the communications tower, if you have questions between now and town meeting, you can contact Fire Chief Edward Bradley. Item B is the vehicle lift system, and that is $55,000. Once again, Fire Chief Edward Bradley. That is item B. Item C is the Herring Ponds Watershed Study. That is $81,024. And Department Head David Gould is available to answer your questions. He's also available to answer your questions for item D, which is the engineering and design for the dam bypass at Jenny Pond. Last week, we had presentations on these items. This week, you're receiving the motions. This Jenny Pond will be for $75,000. Item E, the Manomet Zone pipe upgrades. And for that, we're looking at $5,100,000. This one is a 2/3 vote. Again, Jonathan Beater, the Director, Department of Public Works, is joined by our town engineer, Ms. Sgarzi, and available to answer questions on item E. Item F is the Taxi Echo Extension. That is for $100. Thomas Marr is the airport manager. He will answer questions with respect to that. And I encourage town meeting members, if you have questions, please contact these people in advance of town meeting in order that you can be fully prepared. Finally, item G is the purchase of the NW-26 SRE building for $40,000. Again, Thomas Marr, the airport manager, for a total of $5,951,024. And again, you can use your V-Voter if you have questions. And at this time, we're going to go back to OTI Technology and PACTV. We're going to be looking for a vote to divide the question under Article 4. So town meeting members, you're being asked, a yes vote would be to vote separately on town meeting for items A through G. We'd have a total of 7 separate votes. A no vote would be not to divide, but to keep it as one article, one item. And of course, you can abstain. We're going to look at 30 seconds available. It is there. We're going to start voting as soon as the clock starts to move. Voting will begin now. Please vote on whether or not to divide Article 4 into 7 separate items. That would be a yes vote to divide it. A no vote would be to keep it as it was voted by the Advisory and Finance Committee. Town meeting members can also abstain. For those of you in the public who are watching, town meeting members have a few more seconds in which to vote, and then we're going to see how they voted. And you're going to be able to tell as we go through the precincts. We have the vote totals. 45 say yes, 12 say no, 0 abstentions. So it's pretty clear that at least for the people here this evening that they want to handle this separately. And I'm going to use my authority as town moderator to go ahead and handle it that way at town meeting without a motion to divide. You'll see precincts 4, 5, and 6. The greens are yes votes, the red is a no vote. Precincts 7, 8, and 9, again, the reds are no and the greens are yes. A yellow would be an abstention. We don't have any abstentions. 10, 11, and 12, all voting yes to divide. We're continuing on with precincts 13, 14, and 15. And then I'm going to ask that we go back to precincts 1, 2, and 3, since I didn't see that. And there we go, precincts 1, 2, and 3. So you see, we've had town meeting members vote. Again, they're giving us a sense of the meeting, albeit we don't have a quorum, we don't have a supermajority, but we certainly have enough who have voted. It's not close, and I'm going to rely on that. So thank you, town meeting members, for giving me a confirmation of the sense of town meeting. Now, next, we're going to go to Article 5. Mr. Canty moves the town vote to authorize the Select Board to acquire by purchase for water supply purposes and to accept the deed to the town of Plymouth of land located off Plymouth Street, composed of 18 acres, more or less, and shown as a portion of Lot 9U on Map 107. It's located off Plymouth Street. Said land to be held under the care, custody, control of the Select Board in their role as water commissioners, subject to retention of a leasehold interest in said land by the current owner for a period to expire on or before December 21, 2023, and further to appropriate $800,000 to undertake such acquisition, and to meet this appropriation, transfer $800,000 from, and we'll be giving you the source before town meeting, and to authorize appropriate town officials to enter into all agreements and execute any and all instruments as may be necessary on behalf of the town to effect said purchase. This is going to be a 2/3 vote on the main motion. I do have a motion to amend, but we'll take that up after we hear from the chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee, Kevin Canty.
In a unanimous vote of 12-0 with no abstentions, the Advisory and Finance Committee recommends town meeting approve Article 5. This article will facilitate the acquisition of the Franklin Marsh Bog, the final piece necessary to owning all the water rights to Darby Pond, which will allow the town to submit a permit modification to DEP requesting that the pumping restriction there be lifted. Lifting this pumping restriction will allow the well that is already there to operate at full permitted capacity, which will significantly help to meet the growing water needs of the town. This article is of particular importance. The town is already having problems meeting water demand at peak usage times. And as we all know, the town continues to grow, which will only add to the water demands in the future. Often, when an expensive project or acquisition comes before a town meeting, the question is asked, isn't there a cheaper or more cost-effective alternative? To be clear, in this instance, this article is the cheaper alternative. If the town were to seek alternative means to obtain the same increase to the water supply, it would require the construction of a new well and other additional water infrastructure expenses, and involve years of additional work to locate a suitable site for such construction. It is estimated that such an alternative would cost the town and the taxpayers upwards of $2 million. While many, including the Advisory and Finance Committee, are not delighted by the prospect of spending $800,000 to buy a parcel that was appraised for $390,000, this article's price tag is still $1.2 million below the cost of constructing a new well at an as-of-yet unknown location to achieve the same results. The current owners of this parcel use it to make money. Currently, they use it to make money by producing cranberries. They recognize the value of the parcel to the town's water needs, are willing to part with the parcel for this $800,000 sale price, which will also make them some money. If the town is unable to come up with this money, the current owners will retain ownership of the parcel and continue to use it to produce cranberries, which will continue to negatively impact the town's water supply and force the town to look elsewhere and spend significantly more money to solve its water supply problem. That is why this article is, in fact, already the cheaper and more cost-effective solution to this issue, and that is why the Advisory and Finance Committee unanimously recommends town meeting approve Article 5.
Thank you. That's Kevin Canty. He is the chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee. So the main motion, because of the borrowing that's involved, for the property that's involved, will be a 2/3 vote. However, procedural motions are handled differently. And at least for the procedural motion to amend to reduce the amount of money, that would be a majority vote. So the motion to amend is from Jerry Williams. And she moves that we reduce the main motion by $125,000 to $675,000. And if Jerry is with us, we're going to bring her in now as from being an attendee to being a panelist. And Jerry, I would invite you certainly not to argue your motion, but rather to explain it, why you're bringing it, much like the chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee explains their decision, their vote, what brought you to this decision, and why are you moving this motion to amend to reduce by $125,000. This would be Jerry Williams. She is a town meeting member, and we're going to bring her in. She is coming in now from being an attendee to being a panelist, and there she is. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Jerry Williams. I'm part of Precinct 8, a town meeting representative. I am made my motion to reduce the cost because I felt that the cost of the $800,000 was more than twice what the land was appraised for, and I felt that this was a rather exorbitant amount of money. I thought that by reducing it to $675,000, that might be a compromise between what the property is valued at and what the value of it to the town is, and that perhaps the owners would be more willing to negotiate a little lower price if they saw that town meeting representatives were not willing to pay their high price, which is rather, they see the town over the barrel for water and they're really asking a lot for it. The other issue with this is that this leasehold that is in this motion allows them to continue to draw water for the next 3 years, which could limit what we, rather than totally remove the restriction, it wouldn't totally remove the restriction from with the amount of water that the town could withdraw from the well. And I felt that this was a bad condition on the lease. You know, this leasehold was a bad condition on the sale. And so those are my two reasons. Also, the third reason was that we have been talking about and just recently composed a conservation commission. And I'm hoping that the conservation commission will find ways for the town to reduce their water needs and that we should give them a little bit of time.
Thank you.
Those are my reasons for suggesting reducing the cost, the appropriation.
Thank you. And that's Jerry Williams. She's Precinct 8 town meeting member, and she has presented a motion to amend. Again, reminder, any town meeting member or anyone else that wants to make a motion through a town meeting member can contact me in advance, as Jerry Williams has done, in order that I can then share your procedural motions with town meeting members. On this article, you may recall on presentation night, we had Jonathan Beater and Sheila Sgarzi available to answer questions. On the presentation night, we didn't have the motion to amend. So at this time, I'd just like to take the opportunity to invite first Jonathan Beater and then possibly Sheila Sgarzi or another official to comment or present additional facts related to this question on the appraisal versus the price and whether there's any agreement currently pending and how this would affect any agreement. So Jonathan Beater, Director of Department of Public Works, good evening.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me and hope everybody's doing well. So I think there were 3 points raised by Ms. Williams. The first is the value in terms of the motion to reduce. So we've all talked about that. I will say that, you know, DPW put out a series of questions or responses to questions today and hopefully all the town meeting representatives see that as far as the land acquisition here. One of them being the value of the land. And it's very difficult to assign a value to land that has anything to do with water and the amount of water that we need, especially in this pressure zone. As we all know, the appraisal came in lower than the purchase price. Westons want to sell the land to the town for $800,000. So we're really not comparing apples to apples here, but from a water delivery perspective, the land is invaluable. And what we're doing is we're comparing the purchase price of $800,000 to the Forges Field well that we put online a couple of years ago. Forges Field well cost the town $8 million. It took us 5 years to construct, and we got a million gallons of water per day for that. So if you run the math, that equals about 2.8 million for the Darby acquisition, given if you compare the 2 water volumes. So what Forges Field took us in terms of time and costs, and how we're looking at Darby, 800,000 versus 2.8 million if you compare the 2. So that the Darby acquisition is invaluable to us as a water supplier. We are seeing tremendous stresses in the north pressure zone because of this issue in terms of running a deficit. The other piece is the conservation. A lot of people are talking about this water conservation committee. We do have a meeting set up for the 15th. And we will be talking about ways to reduce overall water withdrawal and the amount of water people use every day. But what we're looking at needs to be addressed in the next couple of years, and we're looking at about 400,000 gallons of water per day. I don't see any conservation measures getting us anywhere near that in the near future, so this is something we need to address today. And the last piece is if there is a reduction, I don't see the Westons reducing their purchase price. We will do our best to try to make this happen, but I can't guarantee that will happen if there is a reduction. So I just want to let all the town meeting reps know that the purchase price of 800 is set by the Westons. I know that we will do everything we can if that number is reduced, but I request you to everybody that the number stays at the 800, please, because that's what the PNS is set for. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Jonathan Beater. He's the Director of the Department of Public Works. And I would also ask in the panel, do we have Sheila Sgarzi here with us this evening? Sheila, is there anything, I do see Sheila. Sheila, do you want to add anything to the presentation from Jonathan Beater, Director of Department of Public Works? Sheila Sgarzi is here with us this evening. If we can bring her in, she's a panelist, and we see her. And Sheila, we see that you're here, and good evening.
Hello, Sheila Sgarzi, town engineer. I think JB pretty well covered the answer to that question, but I'm available to answer any other questions.
Sheila Sgarzi, she's the town engineer. And these are people who can answer questions for you. We're now going to go to Precinct 8, Catherine Holmes, and she has a question. Good evening, Catherine Holmes. This is Article 5 we are discussing in the preview. We welcome Catherine Holmes, who I see on the screen here coming in to us. Good evening.
Hi, I just have a quick question. So what is the plan if this doesn't pass town meeting? Is there a backup plan to support the water need? Because not the actual motion to cut the price, but if town meeting votes no against all of it, what do we do then?
Jonathan Beater, Director, Department of Public Works, if you could respond to Precinct 8, Catherine Holmes. Mr. Beater.
Yeah, so right now, as I mentioned, the water system is stressed in that area. We could see pressure reductions, differences in flows, inadequate firefighting capacity, and just general water supply interruptions. And mostly that will happen during the summertime during peak demand. We experienced that in the drought a couple of years ago because we have to move significant amounts of water into that pressure zone. So a lot of our pumps and infrastructure are working very hard to do that. So you have breakdowns, you have mechanical failures, there's an increased cost to that. But most importantly for us is the amount of development that's happening in that area of town. Along Commerce Way, you're all aware of, and we keep on increasing that overall deficit. We talk about firm capacity. And Ms. Holmes, I sent you some of the responses to those questions from Ed Russell today. So I think that did a really good job. And again, I hope a lot of the town meeting reps see some of these questions and responses to them that really talk about the details of our water system and how sensitive it is. But the DEP requires that we operate our system under a firm capacity scenario, which means we have our largest well offline. In doing that in the north pressure zones, which is Bradford, Plymouth Center, West, and North, we are in a deficit. We do not have enough water to meet the demands of all the current users, for all those current users. And that's really why we're here. So if this doesn't pass, we'll do what we can to make do. We'll struggle. We will have an issue as far as new construction comes online. We will have to work with the Board of Selectmen as water commissioners on that and figure out a way to mitigate that. Town meeting did pass in August new water source exploration. So we'll continue to look at that, and we'll continue ways to move water into that pressure zone. But it's going to be expensive, more than likely more money than what this Darby acquisition will be.
Right. So just to be clear then, so everyone is on the same page when they're doing this vote, there is not a plan today for any other water source if this does not pass.
That's correct.
Thank you, Catherine Holmes, Precinct 8. And now we're going to go to Precinct 13. We're going to bring in Joseph Barron. Joseph Barron, again, we're talking about Article 5 on the Fall Town Meeting warrant. We're bringing him in. We see that he's coming in as a panelist. We're looking for him to have this audio unmuted and also to have his video on. And if town meeting members don't turn on their video, then we'll only hear the audio. Mr. Barron, good evening and welcome.
Mr. Moderator, thank you. I swore I wouldn't do this, but I do have a question. I know other communities use this. What is the position on eminent domain? Is that something that's ever considered for this type of use? I know it's vital that this article pass, but eminent domain is liable to come up. Excuse my inexperience with this.
So I believe there was a question about some of this property being in Kingston and not in Plymouth, but I think I'm going to go to Melissa Arrighi, Town Manager, to speak to the question about eminent domain. Good evening, Melissa.
Thank you. Evening. Eminent domain is always an option for a community. We could bring that to a future town meeting, but here's the challenge in this case. We being all of us as a team in the town, have got this passed by the Board of Selectmen, the FinCom, had the appraisal done, had an agreement to a purchase and sale agreement, and brought it to town meeting. So in my opinion, I think the other side could easily argue this is the floor of what they would start with for a price. If we went down the eminent domain route, it can show that, well, they could easily show that the town had already placed a value on this and negotiated one. It failed at town meeting. So that's the starting point if we actually came in and took it.
Thank you. Melissa Arrighi is the Plymouth Town Manager, responding to a question from Joseph Barron, Precinct 13 Town Meeting member. We'll continue now, if there are no other questions. I do want to mention that if you have an issue with a vote, you can interrupt the meeting with a point of order. You could also use the voter to ask to be heard. You could also just communicate, as Ms. Simpson did this evening. You can communicate with the assistant town moderator when the vote isn't that close. She indicated that in an earlier vote that was taken this evening, her vote did not register, and she's in precinct 10, and on Article 4, she voted no. She said it didn't get recorded. So again, we're taking practice votes this evening to try to clear out the cobwebs on the voting, and we're going to continue and take 2 more votes this evening to see if we can have everybody comfortable with the V-voting platform. We're now going to move to Article 6 in the warrant, and Mr. Canty moves that the town appropriate the sum of $17,500 to pay costs associated with the cyanobacteria sampling of various ponds, including all costs incidental or related thereto, and that to meet this appropriation, $17,500 be transferred from the Environmental Affairs Fund. It's a majority vote. Mr. Gould is available to answer questions. Mr. Canty.
In a unanimous vote of 12-0 with no abstentions, the Advisory and Finance Committee recommends town meeting approve Article 6. This article will provide funding for the Department of Marine and Environmental Affairs and the Health Department to sample public and private water bodies for toxins that are potential health risks. This project would be funded from the Environmental Affairs Fund.
Thank you. It's a majority vote, and again, David Gould is available to answer questions. Next, at this point in the warrant, if the consent agenda article or motion is passed, we would skip right over Article 7, but we haven't voted it yet this evening in our practice. We're going to do that now. I'm going to go to OTI Technology and ask that you put up on the screen the consent agenda. It's up there as a practice. So town meeting members are now going to vote on whether or not to have a consent agenda for Articles 7, Article 10, and Article 13. You're going to vote on whether or not to consent to these to pass, in which case we'll skip over them when we come to them on the warrant because they will be passed on the consent agenda. We're now at Article 7, so I'm going to take this vote on the consent agenda. And again, it's a practice. Voting is going to begin. You see you have 30 seconds. And as soon as the timer starts, we're going to start the voting. And start voting now. Town meeting members have 30 seconds in which to vote at town meeting. For those of you watching the live presentation on Thursday, October 8th, it began at 6 p.m. and we're going through the motions for the fall town meeting, which is going to be on Saturday, October 17th. It's going to begin at 8 a.m. in the morning. We have opening ceremonies followed by a number of articles with motions. The voting has ended. We're now going to get a total on the vote for a consent agenda. 40 say yes, 19 say no, 3 abstentions. If this were an official vote at town meeting, it would pass. And so I'm going to skip over it tonight, except to say that it is included in the consent agenda, and it's Article 7, and it's to appropriate $45,800 installing plantings within the Foothills Preserve Stream and Wetlands Restoration Project. You're seeing town meeting members as we go through the precincts, 7, 8, and 9. The yellow is an abstention, along with the green yes and the red no's. Precincts 10, 11, and 12. This is going to include all costs incidental or related expenses thereto, and to meet the appropriation, $45,800 be transferred from the Environmental Affairs Fund. Again, we have 15 precincts. They're all voting, and the total vote, again, showing precincts 1, 2, and 3, 40 yes, 19 no, 3 abstentions. It's a majority vote normally, but because we combined a 2/3 matter, it would require 2/3. In this case, we had 2/3 just barely. With the 40 to 19, the 3 abstentions do not factor in. So this gives you an idea of how things are going to go at town meeting with the consent agenda item. We're going to need a 2/3 vote for that. We're now going to move on to Article 8. Mr. Canty moves the town appropriate the sum of $10,000 to pay costs associated with the purchasing and equipping an educational trailer for the Department of Marine and Environmental Affairs, including all costs incidental or related expenses thereto, and that to meet this appropriation, $10,000 be transferred from the Environmental Affairs Fund to effect such purchase. It's a majority vote, and we have David Gould, who is able to answer questions. We're going to begin with Kevin Canty, who's going to speak on behalf of the Advisory and Finance Committee, and then we'll go to people with questions. Mr. Canty.
In a unanimous vote of 12 to 0 with no abstentions, the Advisory and Finance Committee recommends town meeting approve Article 8. Approval of this article will allow the Department of Marine and Environmental Affairs to purchase a mobile education trailer for the purpose of providing an educational learning experience in coordination with the schools. The trailer can also be used at local events where it would be available to residents and to tourists. The focus of the educational materials on offer will be numerous native fish, birds and waterfowl, marine animals, assorted woodland critters, and various other forms of local wildlife that can be found in and around Plymouth. The trailer will include displays and tasteful taxidermy. This project would be funded from the Environmental Affairs Fund.
Kevin Canty, he's the chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee. We're going to bring in Precinct 12 town meeting member William Abbott, who has a question. This is on Article 8. Good evening, Mr. Abbott.
Good evening. I tried to make a point of order for the last several minutes when we were discussing the consent agenda. And I think there should have been discussion on whether or not to do the consent agenda, because I believe, the way I've seen the consent agenda working here, it's a slippery slope. You can put a number of articles in this consent agenda that it's kind of ridiculous here because we only have a half a dozen or 10 articles to discuss. What's the purpose of a consent agenda? I think town meeting should debate these articles absolutely, front and back. And unless the article is like receiving a report, otherwise it should be debated and not made part of a bundle. So I was opposed to the consent agenda. I don't think there's any discussion of the motion, but I think that, I don't know how other town meeting members feel about it, but I think it's a dangerous practice. I think town meeting is here to discuss and debate.
Thank you, William Abbott. And again, at town meeting tonight, we're previewing these articles. I selected 1 or 2 motions in order to practice. At town meeting, you'll have a chance to debate this. Mr. Abbott, if you want to be added to a speakers list, I'm happy to do that. I will again remind town meeting members that for the summer town meeting, the annual and the special, we began for the first time with a consent agenda. In part, that was a recommendation that I received from the Mass Moderators Association. Many other communities have done this for many years. They do it in an effort to try to streamline town meeting and to provide town meeting with an opportunity to focus on those articles where there are a lot of questions, debate, and deliberation, and to summarily dispense with other articles that may not require a lot of debate and discussion, particularly when you're meeting virtually and everything is going to take a little more time. We don't have the opportunity to do a voice vote on something that is routinely unanimous. But again, this will be a decision up to town meeting as to whether or not you want to bundle together a few articles that have been recommended for a consent agenda. And it's something we'll continue to do, certainly for as long as we're having remote participation. And at this point, I'm going to go back to people who have asked to speak. We're talking about Article 8, and also Mr. Abbott has also brought up the issue of the consent agenda. Again, we're not going to be debating, but if people have questions, and I was trying to answer the questions raised by Mr. Abbott. Precinct 3, William Cohen, followed by Precinct 10, Brian Fitzgerald. We're going to begin with Mr. Cohen. Good evening. Mr. Cohen, welcome. You're muted. So if you can unmute and start your video. And good evening. And what do you have for us tonight?
I wasn't speaking on the CPA articles. I was speaking as a town meeting member, and I believe Bill Abbott asked a similar question that I was asking, and I guess you explained it, that we'll have a chance to discuss that at town meeting and vote on it then and debate it then.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, Precinct 10, Brian Fitzgerald. Mr. Fitzgerald, do you have questions tonight for this preview? Good evening.
Yes, I do. Regarding the educational trailer, I was just looking to ask what nature of conversations have been had with the the Plymouth School Department to ensure there is a need and that this trailer would actually be used and would integrate with the curriculum and the structures of the schools to be able to make use of it so that it's not sitting in a parking lot somewhere.
Thank you. We'll go to David Gould. He is the head of the Department of Marine and Environmental Affairs. David Gould, good evening and welcome.
Good evening. We've had previous educational work with the schools on water safety, as well as some of the wildlife and shellfish work that we've done. The schools are not the driver of the project. There's a lot of outreach that we can do aside from the schools. So even if in the future the schools didn't want to utilize that, we have plenty of use for this with educational groups, with nonprofits, with watershed groups, as well as at activities throughout the town where people would be able to utilize this trailer and come see the fish and wildlife. So we've never thought of the schools as being the driver or the sole reason for this. There's plenty of other activities in town that would result in the trailer getting an awful lot of use.
Thank you. Ms. Fitzgerald, any other questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to go to Precinct 12, Betsy Hall. We're going to bring her in as we continue to ask questions to gather information for Article 8. And Betsy Hall is joining us. We need to have you unmute yourself. Yes, there you are. Go ahead.
Okay.
Good
Hi,
evening.
Steve. Sorry, I wasn't on this video earlier this evening. I didn't realize I was using the same information. But anyway, thank you for calling on me. I have a procedural question. Could I ask that now? I would have asked it at the beginning. Except
Go ahead.
On the summer town meeting, people were limited, presenters were limited to 3 minutes and speakers were limited to 3 minutes. I would like to move at the beginning of town meeting that speakers be allowed 5 minutes. Is that something I would do right at the very beginning of town meeting?
I can, as the moderator, determine the length of people speaking. And at this time, because again, we're doing the virtual presentation at the summer town meeting that did go well, I'm going to continue with that, but I will entertain some motions to extend time if it's needed. I'm going to be asking people to prepare in advance if they know they want to speak so that their presentation might be well-planned and an efficient use of our time.
So it was awkward during the summer town meeting to get in to say, can this person have an extended amount of time? So should the speaker say, I'd like to have more time in the future? Is that what they should do? Because it wasn't really much time for anybody in the virtual world to say, please allow an extension, because you have to press V voter and then you have to be called on. And by then, you've moved on.
Yeah. Assistant Town Moderator Nicole Manfredi, I'd like to just go to her for a minute, and she can also offer a suggestion. Nicole Manfredi.
I'm thinking that we could, because I'm monitoring the chat, you could pop something into the chat, and then I could communicate that to the moderator.
And the other thing
It's so fast. It goes so fast. If I put it in chat, the presenter's already done and off the screen by the time I get it into chat, because I don't know how long they need until.
Sure.
Because in a regular town meeting, I can stand up or whatever and say, please allow this person to continue. And I think if an article is important enough for us to hear it in town meeting, that the presenter could use less than the 5 minutes, but they should be given 5 minutes.
The chat is fast. The chat
have
can be quicker.
articles.
The chat is instantaneous. So as soon as you type in the chat, I see it. vVoter is quick, but not as quick because it takes time to click the button and all of that. So I don't know. What are your
the other thing I
thoughts?
would just say is if you know in advance
Yeah.
that you want to speak at town meeting, and if you believe that the amount of time you're going to need with your planned presentation speech is going to take longer than 3 minutes, if you notify me in advance, we can review that. But again, overall, for most speakers at town meeting, that worked very well. And again, with the remote participation, we're dealing with this a little bit differently. So I note your concern, and again, we'll see how this works with you and others either notifying me in advance or going into the chat with Nicole Manfredi. She has found that to be very useful, and she communicates that directly to me when she finds that I need to be aware of what's going on in the chat.
And maybe all that needs to happen, Steve, is for you to say to the speaker, if they don't seem quite done, do you need more time? And that's, that would probably take care of the problem.
And that would be depending on the article, how many times that speaker has already spoken and how many other speakers I have in line to speak, because that's part of my concern as the moderator, is not having one person monopolize the debate at town meeting. And also when I see that I have a half a dozen or more people, I want to get in as many as possible before someone moves to close debate. So it is a balancing act, and I will be aware of your concern.
And I was thinking more of the speaker, the presenter, I mean, for the particular article than the speakers. I was very much focused on the person who's actually doing the presenting.
Yeah, and
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I think I've been flexible. The presenters aren't limited to 3 minutes, but thank you. Anything else on Article 8? If not, I do see a couple other people. Going to go to Precinct 5, Michael Withington, followed by Precinct 4, Virginia Davis. Mr. Withington, good evening. I see him on the screen. Don't see your video, but I see you. Go ahead.
Appreciate the recognition, Steve, and all the hard work that goes into it. My point was, I do think that when someone is presenting or someone who's speaking on an article, provided they're not running in excessive time, that you should be able to ask the presenter or the speaker if they'd like to extend the time. I'd solicit the chair, the moderator to ask that question so that we could take a vote on that. So I know time is important, but also the taxpayer dollars are as important. So what we'd like to do is have things be vetted in the public eye and on the presentation. So thank you very much for your consideration. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Michael Withington is in Precinct 5. We're going to go to Precinct 4, Virginia Davis. Virginia Davis, good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay. I think the 3 minute is fine. I think what that requires is that you sit down and you write what you're going to talk about, and you practice and you talk to someone else, and it just makes it more succinct. I think it means you've got to prepare ahead of time, because sometimes we get up there and we just keep repeating. So, anybody can sit and organize their thoughts, or maybe have someone else have another town meeting, Zoom with them or talk on the phone with them. But time yourself. I think it's okay.
Thank you. Virginia Davis, obviously we have different points of view. I will certainly do my best at town meeting to run it in a fair and efficient manner that meets the needs and concerns of everyone. Anything else? We're going to continue with Article 9A. Mr. Canty moves to rescind Article 16B, National Meeting House Restoration Project, and Article 16C, Stevens Field Restoration and Rehabilitation Project of the August 10, 2020 Annual Town Meeting, and further to amend the following August 10, 2020 Annual and Special Town Meeting articles by rescinding the original funding sources and authorizing the new funding sources, and they're listed in a chart. Kevin Canty, Chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee. This is going to be a majority vote. Mr. Canty.
Unanimous vote of 12-0 with no abstentions. The Advisory and Finance Committee recommends town meeting approve Article 9A. This article is a housekeeping article that will correct some inaccuracies with Community Preservation Act funding sources relative to Article 16 of the annual and Article 9 of the special August 2020 town meetings, based on an updated calculation of the actual available funds in the CPA fund due to the ongoing pandemic and a reduction in the state's matching funds from last year.
Thank you. That's Kevin Canty, is the Chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee. Lynn Barrett is the Director of Finance, and she's available if you have questions about funding sources for this article. And hearing no other questions, we're going to go to Article 9B. Mr. Canty moves the town vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by purchase for open space and recreational purposes pursuant to the Community Preservation Program, and to accept the deed to the town of Plymouth of land located off Tall Pines Road. It's composed of 34 acres, more or less. Kevin Canty, Chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee. This, again, is a majority vote.
In a vote of 12-0 with one abstention, the Advisory and Finance Committee recommends town meeting approve Article 9B. Approval of this article will appropriate $117,000 from the Community Preservation Act fund reserves for open space and recreational purposes. This acquisition off Tall Pines Road will provide protection to the headwaters of the Eel River and Russell Mills Pond. Protecting Plymouth's sole source aquifer will aid in the protection of the town's drinking water and help to keep Plymouth Harbor clean.
Kevin Canty. William Cohen is available to answer questions. He is Chair of the Community Preservation Committee. Also, a few other people in the chat. We're going to be going to Precinct 10, Peter Neville, who has a question. And while we're bringing him in, I just want to mention Jeanette McKay indicates that 2 of her votes did not get counted on 4 and 7. Some of these issues can be user error, which is why we're doing the practice votes. Also, some people have asked about showing the queue on camera. Well, again, this evening is not for debate, so you don't really need to know who's in line and still wants to be heard. But certainly at town meeting, we do show the queue when we have a motion to close debate. I'm going to now go to Peter Neville, who's on your screen. Good evening once again, Mr. Neville.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm a dollar short and a day late. I'm back on 9A, and I'm sorry, but I just didn't get to it in time. Was there any reason why you didn't add this to the consent agenda? Is it going to result for larger sums of money than were appropriated in the original votes?
Mr. Neville, the consent agenda was developed by some people who thought that there were certain articles that would not be engender much debate or deliberation, that they'd be unanimous or fairly unanimous. I can ask certainly the chair of the Community Preservation Committee, William Cohen, if he would like to weigh in on why he would or would not like this article to be on the consent agenda. Mr. Cohen, if you can come back in from being an attendee to being a panelist and respond to Peter Neville. I know you didn't determine the consent agenda, but you might have an opinion. Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Steve. Bill Keohan with the Community Preservation Committee. The Community Preservation Committee defers to the Finance Department on Article 9A. We worked with them on structuring this, and I know the Community Preservation Committee would prefer not to be part of the consent agenda, that our article's out there. So if anyone has specifically wants to debate any component of one or more of them, they can at that time. But we did come to this conclusion with the Finance Department, and if Lynn Barrett wants to confirm anything else, we defer to her on how she wants to handle the article. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Melissa Arrighi. She is Plymouth Town Manager, and she will also speak to this question. Good evening and welcome once again, Melissa Arrighi. You are our Plymouth Town Manager. Go ahead.
The reason that I didn't recommend for the consent agenda is I felt that it was complicated enough. When you start moving around money and making corrections like this, we like to have town meetings trust. And I felt that the town meeting members, the Finance Committee, and the selectmen would rather hear why we were making all these corrections rather than put it on a consent agenda.
Okay.
Because the question is, does the bottom line change, or is it really bookkeeping?
It's absolutely bookkeeping, and it doesn't increase any of the amounts or change anything along those lines.
So at the last town meeting, we looked at all this stuff. This is really housekeeping.
Well, I think it's housekeeping, but I also know that town meeting members like to be aware of when we're moving money or reaching into different resources. And this was a large correction. You don't typically see this. It's different. So I thought that you would want to hear about it at least. It was just a judgment call.
Much appreciated, as usual.
Thank you. We're now going to go to Precinct 4, John Hammond, and that'll be followed by Precinct 12, William Abbott. So we're going to bring in Mr. Hammond and Mr. Abbott. And first, welcome John Hammond. John, if you can unmute yourself. We see that you're muted. So if you can press the unmute. There you go. And good evening and welcome. We also don't see your video, but we can hear you. Go ahead and speak.
Go
ahead.
I'm about to become visible, I think.
There, you're visible now. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is, this doesn't address the question of amounts at all. So I would like to know whether the actual amounts of money would change under what you're proposing.
William Cohen is the chair of the Community Preservation Committee. Mr. Cohen, do you care to respond to a question from Mr. Hammond?
No, Bill Keohan with the Community Preservation Committee. Mr. Hammond, no, the amounts are not changing. We're just identifying how we're going to approach these articles that town meeting had passed in August. They were articles that had been recommended for spring town meeting in April. Time had passed by the time we voted on these articles. There had been some account adjustments that had to be identified, and they were done in August, and we saw that we needed to correct things, and we took advantage of this fall town meeting by putting this article in front of fall town meeting so that they could vote on the necessary rescinding of the meeting house set aside and the Stephen Sales set aside. We do plan to come back to a future town meeting and bring those articles forward, but at this time we felt it was best to rescind it so that we could operate from available funds for our current and immediate recommendations at town meeting. But it was all done under the advisement of our finance department, and the amounts are not going to change.
Thank you.
And we're now going to go to Precinct 12, William Abbott. Mr. Abbott, welcome once again. Go ahead.
Mr. Moderator, but this example of the last few minutes shows why this consent agenda is a dangerous thing, because, you know, it's basically the subjective opinions of a couple of our town officials who decided to put these articles in the consent agenda. Were basically, you know, they're hidden from the town meeting debate. And I really think that is not the way we should be doing this. Once an article is in the town meeting warrant, It shouldn't, it should be in full view of everybody and not put on a bundled agenda where we have to try to pry it loose from a consent agenda. I hope you're going to have a chance to debate this whole idea of the consent agenda at the meeting, the town meeting coming up.
Yes, Mr. Abbott, as I said earlier, you will have the chance to debate, just as you had the chance at the summer town meeting, and this was not included in the consent agenda for the very reason that you've stated, and also the town manager has stated. And that's why we have some articles in the consent agenda and some articles, and most articles are not in the consent agenda. But your point,
that decision, moderator.
that decision is made by town meeting. It is recommended to town meeting. The decision will be made by you and 134 other town meeting members. Any further discussion on the article we've been discussing with respect to community preservation? If not, I'm going to continue, and we have Article 9C. Mr. Canty moves, the town vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by purchase for open space and recreational purposes pursuant to the Community Preservation Program and to accept the deed to the town of Plymouth of land located off 126, 120, and 0 Sandwich Street. It's composed of 0.45 acres. Again, a majority vote. Kevin Canty, Chair, the Advisory and Finance Committee.
In a vote of 7-5 with no abstentions, the Advisory and Finance Committee recommends town meeting approve Article 9C. Approval of this article will appropriate $390,000 from the Community Preservation Act fund reserves for open space and recreational purposes. This acquisition will enlarge and enhance the Stevens Field plan to include easier public access, increased open space, and to provide additional parking, including parking overflow for town events. The parcels comprise a total of 0.45 acres located at 0, 120, and 125 Sandwich Street, abutting Stevens Field, and will be held in the care and control of the Conservation Commission.
Vote. William Keohan is available as the chair of the Community Preservation Committee. We do have some questions. We're going to begin with Precinct 13, Daniel Gorsica. He'll be followed by Precinct 2, Richard Serkey. Good evening, Mr. Gorsica, and go ahead and speak. We can't see your video, but we can see you're available to speak.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see everyone virtually. I just have a quick question about these parcels. I know it looks like they're zoned commercial, and I know this is a hard area in town in general, as far as in some environmental constraints, but I was just hoping someone could speak on behalf of that. This is commercial property, and if there's any value at actually having someone actually produce commercial here. I know the town is in desperate need of a commercial tax base.
I'm going to first go to William Keohan, just because this is his article from his committee, and we can then go to another town official if needed. Mr. Keohan?
Yes, Bill Keohan with the Community Preservation Committee. Mr. Corsica, just to address your concerns about the limited amount of commercial land in the town of Plymouth and the possibilities and benefits of that land. In this case, you're in downtown Plymouth, which, yes, has a village center of diversity of levels of intensity of commercial use, but it sprawls out around a residential area. Some of those residential areas are in close proximity to the commercial areas. They have been for centuries, and there has been a balance to that relationship between the commercial areas of the village center and the neighborhoods. There's also some transitional zoning areas, and that's where this parcel lies. There's a transitional area as you move away from downtown. At this location, there is a park. It is a public park on the ocean. It allows for residents of this densely populated area. It's not only commercial, there are people living there, to have access to the ocean, to the waterfront, to recreational space. The town has grown since this park was first designed in 1917. It's over 100 years later, and the population is far greater than it was in 1917. So the town should be making accommodations in its urban areas. for parks and recreational space, and especially for the entire town of Plymouth, both Nelson Park and Stevens Field, bookend downtown Plymouth, make it a desirable place to come to a park and then go to a restaurant or then go to a store. So those events are connected. So having a decent park in our downtown helps the businesses, and it also helps with large events that happen downtown to accommodate big events, fireworks and parades. Stevens Field acts as a staging area and supportive area for multiple activities. So we've also had a number of studies that have been done over the last 25 years, identifying that the town should look at land abutting public space and parks as possible acquisitions to meet the growing needs of the community. So there is a balance between in this part of town, in the village centers around town, downtown Plymouth, where people are living and working in the same place, trying to maintain a healthy balance. In this case, these locations had been commercially used as a bus stop, a car dealership, an auto parts store, kind of a, it was an area of municipal use that required to be cleaned. And so there were some environmental hazards, so they had to be addressed. And this would be an appropriate use after that intensity may have made the land more complicated for a greater interaction with the general public and construction. So there are some issues relevant to the site that if you were to try to fully exercise construction on one of these locations, it would create, cost prohibitive circumstance with possible levels of cleanup and to get to that, achieve that level of commercial use that you speak of or fear we're losing. But in this case, I think there's a careful balance, and I think we've met that balance at Stevens Field.
Thank you, William Cohen, Chair of the Community Preservation Committee. Mr. Gorska, does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks for taking the time, Bill.
Thank you. Precinct 2, Richard Cirque, followed by Precinct 10, Peter Nevels. Good evening, Mr. Cirque.
Good evening. My question is whether Mr. Canty
Richard,
could explain.
Richard, we don't see you on video. If you do want to be on video, if you can start your video. But go ahead, we can hear you, so go ahead and talk.
Okay. My question is whether Mr. Canty could explain why there were 5 people who voted against this. In other words, what was their concern? Because usually the Finance Committee speaks unanimously or nearly unanimously. Thank you.
Kevin Canty, Chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee, do you care to respond?
Sure, Steve. So we did provide town meeting members one of the documents that you have that's been provided to you via the mail and is also available on the town website under quick links. Town meeting information is the minutes by article document. You go in that document to Article 9C, you can see the minutes that relate to our discussion about Article 9C. Now in Article 9C, we did have one of our members speak that he was not convinced about that this was a worthwhile venture and that he would prefer to see it remain on the tax rolls as opposed to being put into conservation status and rolled into this project as is being proposed here. The other members of the committee that voted along with that member who voted against approval or recommending approval did not express verbally their opinions on the matter, although based on the content and context of the discussion, one could infer that they agreed in whole or in part with Mr. Blanchard, the one who did speak, or that they, for other reasons, disagreed with the worthwhileness of the project itself. But all of the discussion that we had on this article, and in fact for every article, is contained and detailed to the extent that it is possible to do so in the minutes by article document that has been provided.
Thank you, Kevin Canty.
I just haven't gotten that yet, but I'm sure I'll get it in the mail perhaps tomorrow.
Mr. Cirque, you should
And it
have
also is
received...
available online if you don't have it yet.
Okay.
Mr. Cirque, I can encourage you to contact Jeanette White at the Advisory and Finance Committee. If you've not received it, these were distributed last week. You should have received it by now. So I encourage you tomorrow to follow up on that. Precinct 10, Peter Neville, good evening again.
Thank you. Quick question. Looking at the map that's provided in the explanatory notes for this article, I'm wondering if the town is the abutter to these parcels, or will there have to be other acquisitions? Looks like there's a parking lot right behind 126. 130 has a street beside it, and 0 is right behind Remmel's. So heading east towards the beach, does the town own all that land, Bill, or do we have to go get that too?
Keohan, he's the chair of the Community Preservation Committee. Mr. Keohan.
The town does. If you look at that map, and if you want, I can share my screen and you can look at that too. But if you're looking at your books that have been provided by the Finance Committee, you'll see there's a map, and directly to the east, there's an area, and there's it looks like a parking lot.
Yeah.
That's the old AK Finney property, which became the P&B bus station. The town of Plymouth bought that when they bought the fire station back in 1977. In the year 2007, it was the Open Space Committee in Precinct 3 that went to a town meeting and asked that that land be moved from general municipal use into the care and protection of the Parks and Recreation Department, which then set up a scenario where that land has now become part of Stevens Field as a recreational space and is protected under Chapter 97. This isn't an open space acquisition. This is a recreational space acquisition. And these parcels that we recommend will join those other parcels that join Stevens Field. Right now, David Gould is finishing up on the permitting process around an article town meeting passed a few years ago about the design of Stevens Field and set money aside for its renovations. Stevens Field will go under some renovations late this year and early next year. And that parking lot that you're looking at that abuts this property, that is planned to pull back infrastructure from the ocean that makes up Stevens Field. The tennis courts will move back there, parking will move back there, and the piece that we have proposed will act as a pedestrian entrance, a scenic overlook to Stevens Field, and also provide possible seasonable use in different activities. So there was a presentation that was made a couple of weeks ago with a video. I'll be more than happy to email that video to you so you could take a look at it if you didn't have a chance to see it. But we do go over that in the presentation forum part of town meeting. We did show a little PowerPoint, and we did show what we have planned for Stevens Field. And I'd be more than happy to send it to you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Just great job. Great job.
Thank you, William Keohan. He's the chair of the Community Preservation Committee, responding to Peter Neville, Precinct 10. We're going to go to Precinct 4, Virginia Davis. Welcome once again.
Hi. I wondered if during this presentation that, Bill, you could go into your presentation where you show with a red marking where this property is, because it is difficult if people don't know Stevens Field and know the property there. When you're looking at all gray, all one color, it's really hard to tell. But it was really great on your presentation on the one that shows in red marking that property. I don't know if you can do that or not.
So again, we're hoping that with the presentation night and the preview that we will be able to go to the debate and deliberation on Saturday. Mr. Keohan, are you able to show that now?
Yes,
sharing the screen?
Thank you. Right.
And if you can do that, maybe you can explain what Precinct 4, Virginia Davis, has just highlighted as part of your presentation. This is the town meeting preview, and it's coming to you on October 8th, live from PACTV Studios. We're here with town meeting members. We're on Article 9C of the warrant for the fall annual town meeting. We're going to go through all the articles, and tonight we're reviewing the motions and we're answering questions from town meeting members in connection with these. And Mr. William Keohan is the chair of the Community Preservation Committee, and in response to a question from Virginia Davis, Precinct 4, he is endeavoring to share some information on the screen, and here we go. He shared the Community Preservation Act on the screen, and if you want to talk and explain what we're going to be seeing, Mr.
So
Keohan.
we'll shoot right ahead. to Stevens Field. There's Stevens Field article. There's Stevens Field from the air. I'll move quickly to these photographs that Ms. Davis has indicated. There's Stevens Field. It's outlined in yellow here, the current Stevens Field. And here are the little lots, the 3 parcels that are up on Sandwich Street. This is the area in which Mr. Neville was referencing this area. He was wondering, is that part of Stevens Field? And yes, it is. I do have another shot where we get a little closer and we can see the parcel as it relates. Here's Sandwich Street. This is Stevens Lane heading up to Whiting Street. This is the south entrance to Stevens Field. Then here's the Plymouth Fire Station, and this is the little gas station next to Plymouth Fire Station. And then you come to the 3 parcels, 2 that sit right up on Sandwich Street. And then there's a 3rd parcel in the back that abuts the back end of Stevens Field. In between the 3 parcel, there is a yellow indication of a 14-foot right-of-way that already the town owns. The town does have access to Sandwich Street at this point. This is only enhancing that by another 200 feet along Sandwich Street. I hope that helps with your visual, your thoughts on the parcel as they relate to the street and with the park. Does that help, Ms. Davis?
Virginia Davis, Precinct 4, who is with us this evening as a town meeting member, and also we brought her in as a panelist. And I just want to say, while we're bringing her back in, well done, William Cohen. I would recommend to all presenters, if you're able to do what he's been able to do, screen sharing with town meeting members when they have a question. That's very helpful in responding. We're going to go back now away from the screen sharing and Mr. Cohen, and I believe this is responsive to the question from Virginia Davis.
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to thank Bill. I understand, I'm on the Stevens Field Advisory Committee. You know, we've been working on this since 2013. So I understand this, but most people don't understand this. So that is the best, looking at that, it really helps you understand what we're talking about here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia Davis, Precinct 4. We're now going to go back to town meeting members. We're going to bring in Precinct 3, Richard Barbieri. Good evening, Mr. Barbieri. We're going to bring you in from being an attendee to being a panelist. And while we're waiting for that to happen, let's see if we can hear your audio as we try to bring in your video. Good evening. Richard Barbieri, Precinct 3. And I think this is just taking a minute. There we go. They're working in the studio, doing production, and they stopped the screen sharing, and now they're going to bring in Richard Barbieri from being an attendee to being a panelist so that we can. And Mr. Barbieri, I'm told if you could turn on your camera if you want your video to be shown. Meanwhile, if you can go ahead and start speaking, I can see you on the screen. Mr. Barbieri.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Good evening. Go
I
ahead.
have one question. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have one question. One of the parcels, the one behind the gas station, is that wetlands?
William Cohen, could you respond?
Yes, Bill Cohan with the Community Preservation Committee. Mr. Barbieri, that is not designated. It has not been designated as wetlands. That area behind the old Vining Gulf Station, as you start to go towards Stevens Field, is dry. But in recent memory, no one has dug in these locations at any great depth. I know that when they were doing renovations to the fire station back in 1974, and I know that recently when the Community Preservation Committee was involved with the Hollow House, the old Fort House, when we were doing renovations to that with CPA funds back in 2004, there were issues of water in the foundated area. So there's there's different issues around Stevensfield. Water is trying to make its way through Stevensfield from behind Mount Pleasant, coming down Stevens Street, going under the road and making its way to that duck pond. And Stevensfield used to be a big estuary, a low-lying wetland, and water is still trying to make its way there, regardless of what we've done on top of it. In that area, it's kind of hit or miss if you start to dig around it in great depth. In this area, though, if you're on it, it hasn't experienced any issues. There's never been any delineation of any wetlands in the vicinity of that piece that's behind the gas station. But there are wetlands over towards behind the fire station, out in that wooded area that the town owns behind Stevensfield. And obviously by the duck pond and down by the basketball court, there's some wetlands, but this area has never been identified as one that I know of.
Thank you, William Keohan. He is the chair of the Community Preservation Committee, responding to Richard Barbieri, Precinct 3. And at this time, we're going to move on to Article 10. Now, Article 10, if we approve a consent agenda, will have been approved. This is an example of one of the articles that was selected. It has to do with amending a general bylaw and deleting some language that is shown as strike-through. It'll be a majority vote. Article 11 is now no motion, no action. And we would then continue to Article 12, which is no motion, no action. Article 13 is included again in the consent agenda. It is a 2/3 vote. And also Lee Hartman, Director of Planning and Development, is available to answer questions related to Article 13. At this point, if we complete all of the articles and there's no further debate, Mr. Canty would move to dissolve the town meeting. And once it is dissolved, it would be over. But this evening, we're not dissolving, but we are going to adjourn. And one last practice vote, if OTI Technologies can bring another practice vote on the screen. We're going to be, in a sense, voting to adjourn this preview. It's also, in a sense, a roll call vote to see who's still with us, how many town meeting members we have, and it's a practice. So we've got the 30 seconds. Now we need to see on the screen. Here's the vote. Yes to adjourn and no to keep going or abstain. As soon as the timer starts, we'll get your votes. And we're going to start voting now. Please vote. We had 2 town meeting members this evening who said their votes weren't properly recorded. So again, more practice, more training, and we're going to scroll through the precincts and see if we can get it right with everyone's vote being properly recorded as indicated. Again, thank you to the Assistant Moderator, Nicole Manfredi, to Julie Thompson, her staff here at PACTV, to OTI Technologies, to Christy Kenny, and also to Drew. That ends the voting. And so the voting now we have, and we're going to see on the screen the results of the voting. As we do always, we're going to get a total of those who voted. We're also then going to scroll through precincts. OTI Technology is supporting us. 51 say yes, 1 person says no. Keep going. We're going to stop after this, but we're going to scroll through the precincts, make sure your votes are properly recorded. We're going to begin and show each of the 15 precincts. We do it in groups of 3. And again, reminding town meeting members as we scroll through, beginning with 4, 5, and 6, we'll come back to 1, 2, and 3. This town meeting preview is going to be replayed on government access channels 15 and 47. Saturday, you can watch at 6 p.m. Monday at 8 p.m. There'll also be more replay show times. You can also go online and watch PACTV Video Share channel on youtube.com. And Saturday afternoon at PACTV Video on Demand. Again, town meeting members invited to contact me if you have procedural motions or other issues that you wish to discuss in advance of town meeting. We've just scrolled through all the precincts. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for this town meeting preview coming to you live on Thursday, October 8th. Please join us once again next week on Saturday, October 17 at 8 a.m. We've got some very special opening ceremonies to be followed by a very vigorous and active fall town meeting by remote participation. This is Steve Triffletti, Plymouth Town Moderator. Good evening.